Hey guys, I am so thrilled to be with you with a fellow writer, a fellow speaker, author, writer, all the same now. But I am so excited because it was a total godsend that we were even able to connect at the last Sunrise Music Festival. For those of you in the local area, as our guest today is as well, that happens every year. I think they're going to be on their 25th year next year, which is wild. But it's a worship festival that happens right here in the Hampton Roads area at the oceanfront. And I was just walking by, connecting with the booth host as I was a fellow booth host, and I saw this table filled with books. And surely when you go to a table filled with books, you wouldn't possibly imagine that that one person sitting behind the booth is the one who wrote said books. So Tracy already has 15 books. I think there's probably more as far as resources and all the things that she has, but more on the way. So as a fellow author, it's not the one-off author. It's not the one-time bestseller. This is something that literally she lives her life through and by. And I'm excited for those of you who are messengers to tune in today to get some insight, because she also has a writer's academy. And Lord knows that book coaching is not the side of the publishing house that I spend time on. So this is going to be a good synergy piece for you guys to get to know her, to connect with her, to learn from her. She's done this and it ain't her first time. So Tracy, we're excited to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and glad all of God has ordained from that just brief, unexpected meeting.
Yes, it's going to be fun. So let's get into the conversation around your testimony, because I think it's really a pivotal portion that oftentimes if people see your rap sheet, your title, whatever that is, they kind of breeze past and they stay in like the present moment of, oh, wow, you're a 15 best time, seller. But let's go to the backstory, because you didn't always have, maybe you have the knack for writing, but you didn't always have this title. And I want to know what that evolution story is like.
Right. Well, it's funny. I tell people that writing is definitely a God-given gift, not something that he gave me naturally, because I was a math kid. So I actually won a math contest in third grade and never liked essays or research papers. I'm like, give me the multiple choice, give me the true false, give me the math. And it changed a little in college. So I remember learning to write for English. And it was always not flowery enough, not flowery enough. And then I went to pursue my bachelor's in psychology. And then it was too flowery, make it, clean cut. And so learning just different aspects of writing. And I think like most people in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, it'd be cool to write a book one day, but never really thought it would happen. And then when I was, I guess, 28, had my second child, and we just had felt led, after me going to school for 7 years and getting 3 degrees, to be a stay-at-home mom. And it was a great transition, but it was also a difficult transition because I was a counselor. So I spent all day, every day talking to people, counseling people. We had a great team that really worked together, and we had meetings and lunch together. And then I was at home with not only my 2-year-old and newborn, but also another, I think I had an 18-month-old and a 15-month-old also at home with me. And there was nobody to talk to. So it was a difficult transition. So about 6 months in, I started talking to paper, because that's, I'm a talker. I'm the kid that all through elementary school, every report card had the same comment: talks too much, talks too much, talks too much. So I've always been a talker. And so the Lord just used that time to transition that communication into paper. And nothing ever came of that first book that I thought that I was meant to pursue. And the Lord just led me. So I started, okay, so I think this is what I'm supposed to do. I started going to writers' conferences, writers' seminars. I, of course, read everything I could get my hands on, books at the library, blogs. I think still are somewhat popular, but back in the mid 2000s, super popular, growing a lot. So I read everything I could to get my hands on about writing, became a member of ACFW, which is American Christian Fiction Writers Group, did critique groups, did my first fiction book in 2010, I think. It was awful. It was really, really bad, but I had something on paper. Yes. And so I started letting people read it and taking their feedback and doing critique groups, and just grew and learned the craft of writing really by doing the work, by putting in the time, putting in the effort, anywhere I could get it. Because at that point, I had 4 of my own kids. I was actually working part-time.
Yeah.
And so I would just, oh, the kids are napping and the bigger kids are watching a show. So let me sit down and get something done, and just getting those little snippets wherever I could. I wrote for a local newspaper for a while and a local women's magazine. I did a couple of national articles. So I did, I forget the parent company, but like Parenting Life and the Christian parenting magazines, I had some articles published. And so just kind of was going along and writing as much as I could, learning about the craft. In the middle, we ended up moving and building a house. So that was kind of a slump in my writing career, because I was homeschooling 4 kids that were kind of upper elementary, middle, entering high school at that point, and building a house, which we did probably 70% of it ourselves.
Wow.
And so in 2018, we moved in our house, and that's really when I got back to God's calling to write. And so I just finished a 9-book series for Pelican Book Group, a small Christian publisher. So all of that's in the editing process. I am patiently waiting on release dates. I don't have any of those yet. But in the meantime, I've been working on my cozy mysteries and been doing some freelance editing for about the last 5 years. What I learned in editing is I was teaching people through editing. Not just going to go, you need a comma here, this can be said better, replace this dialogue tag with an action tag, don't have both. So there's a lot of that, but I wanted to say, hey, this is what people are looking for. This is good grammar. This is what really makes a book take it to that next level, so that you're engaging your reader, you're keeping them engaged on every page. And I'm like, I'm coaching.
Yes, for sure.
I'm coaching.
Yeah.
And so last year, I really thought the Lord was leading me that direction, but I was still looking for like a part-time editing job.
Yeah.
Because we just, really wanted that little bit of extra income. My kids are getting older. I'm graduating them. And the Lord just didn't open any doors. I'm like, okay, Lord, if by the end of 2023, I don't have a part-time job, I will launch the coaching.
Yeah.
And so I didn't. And I spent the first 6 months really just planning, working my website, consulting with people, trying to figure out how to record courses, because pre-recorded courses, being able to do it in your own time is really very powerful, I think, in today's world.
Completely.
To do the one-on-one coaching. So figuring out all the logistics, the technical aspects. I'm what you call a solopreneur. So I'm doing it all on my own. I have a small support network. They're not really business oriented, but they're encouragers, which is just as important as my ladies that come alongside me and they pray for me. And they're like, yes, we believe you can do this. So I launched the coaching academy. So I have the christianwritingcoach.net and then the christianwritingacademy.com, where I have a handful of courses. I started communicating with people. This week, I'm offering free 20-minute consultations because what I have found is everybody has different needs. I want to write a book, but what's stopping you? And for everybody, that's different. It could be time. It could be, I don't know how or where to start, or, I have writer's block. I've gotten this far. I talked to someone recently and she had her outline, but didn't know where to go from there. And so to be able to talk to somebody and hear, okay, where are you? Where have you been? Where do you want to go? These are the next steps. And so what I'm really focusing on now is just sharing about that with people, because I hear all the time, I want to write a book. I want to write a book. Well, I want to flood the market with good kingdom books, books that glorify the Lord and uplift the church. And that can be fiction or nonfiction, but I want us to do it well. So there's a lot of really good Christian books out there, but with self-publishing being so easy, there's a lot of not well-written Christian books out there. And so kind of like the Kendrick brothers did for the movie industry, and they really took the Christian movie industry from B- to C, not that there were never any good ones, and elevated the expectations. I want to help.
Love that.
Whoever wants to write a book for the Lord to not just do it, but to do it with excellence.
Oh
And so
gosh,
that's
there's so many layers to this. I have so many questions. But
my
this is
20-year journey.
yes. Well, it's my passion, right? It's my passion to see people go from that, like, okay, the Lord has dropped his seed in my heart and
Right.
I need to execute. And a lot of people struggle in that place of like, okay, here's the seed, but how do I water it? What does growth look like? And then what is
Right.
execution? What does the harvest side of that look like? Most people never get to see that. And as I've worked with so many different authors over the course of their journey, I know that the area in which I'm meant to come alongside them is the post writing process. But they have so many questions about the writing process,
Right.
and my way of writing doesn't necessarily have to be their way of writing. And so I have tactics and tools that I teach for sure. But I really think that having this coupled experience where people are like, go through this synergy, understand what that's like, and then be catalyzed into the person who knows how to get it to market, to effectively have the
Right.
traction for the book, to continue to turn the message into a movement. Because otherwise, what's happening, especially even in the self published world, if people want to look to that as an option, which is not the way we publish, but it is a great option if that's something that you want to do. You click the button and then all of it's on your shoulders. And
Right.
if you have anything come up that's the second priority or the third priority, or it's not a priority at all, it
Yeah.
will just sit there and it won't do what that seed was meant to do, which is meant to multiply. And so
Right.
that multiplication factor is really critical. Let's go back to the element of you going from like one to many books. And now with this 9-part series with
Yeah.
this smaller Christian publishing house, talk to us through like, what was the affirmations or that encouragement that you were receiving for other people that helped continue to propel you forward? Because I think if your first book or your second book, it like doesn't land,
Right.
like this isn't for me. So what was that thing that kept you going? Obviously the Lord, but how? What was he saying and speaking to you? What were others
Right. I
saying?
think I remember different times where I'm like, obviously my first book wasn't a bestseller. I'm actually looking at discontinuing my first book because I know everything now I didn't know then. And
Yeah.
I lost the file. So I'm like, I can't even go back and edit it and make it great.
Yeah.
And, working hard, marketing's always been my weakness.
Yeah.
And so the sales haven't always been I've had some success and been really pleased with how some things have done, positive feedback from my encouragers and even from other people. But I don't want to rely just on that, because you can get that one negative review or that one, that person that always sees what could be improved, which there's benefit to that, but it also feels heavy as criticism a lot of times. And so there's been times I'm like, okay, this isn't what I want it to be yet. Is this really what I'm supposed to do?
Yeah.
And every single time I feel like the Lord put someone in my path, whether it was a Christian conference that I went to or a writing workshop or
Good.
just someone responding to my book randomly, he's put in my path to say, this was really powerful for me, or I really enjoyed this book, so that I would have that confirmation that, no, it doesn't look exactly like what I wanted it to look like by now, but this is the path the Lord has laid out for me. And he just puts those people in my path along the way to say, yes, this is having an impact. And even this morning I was listening to a podcast and she's like, we used to be content if 8 people showed up at our house for coffee to discuss the Bible and life together. And now we're looking at numbers online. But if you impact one person,
Yes, ma'am.
and so because the Lord has provided those people to share with me how this book or that book or this post even or that post has had a positive impact or was the right timing or exactly what they needed to hear, that's been enough encouragement for me to go, okay, this really is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I need to not count the numbers and not focus on the numbers, but count the impact of me choosing to continue to be obedient when I may not see the results yet that I want to see.
Well, it's totally that word obedience is really what I was grateful that you brought into, because that's what I was thinking. I mean, it just takes more steps. It just takes continued diligence and
Right.
practicing obedience and laying down what our ideas are, because his thoughts are higher, his ways are higher. And ultimately to know that, especially this is the joy of doing it from a Christian lens, to be able to do it and speak the good news. We are creating eternal salvation links, right? We're
Right.
linking people to their Father who has an eternal gift for them. And so, regardless if it's fiction or not, you're still implanting that seed for them, and you're creating curiosity and an invitation. And so, I love that that's a portion of how we get to write and who we get to propel, as far as who we would say our avatar is for those listening. Like, those are the people we want to help. Your message is going to look totally different than the next person. I've got so many books in queue right now that I'm like, wow, I've never even thought about that. We're about to publish a bullying book that also is
Yeah.
inviting people into story conversations of hope and identity. I'm like, this is brilliant. And I
Yeah.
didn't come up with it, they did. And so I'm so excited for those particular authors to be able to see how their message, right, the mess to the message, how that it propels testimony and ultimately transformation. Let's talk to those. You said something twice in both of the sections that you're sharing about writers' conferences and getting in the room and being with other writers, because Lord knows this is an isolated, it's just like entrepreneurship from that
Yes.
solopreneurship. You're like, I'm
Yeah.
doing it alone. No one's out there. You're like yelling into a cave, echo, echo, echo. You're like, no one's here. So I think the biggest thing that people struggle with is writer's block when it comes to that. So let's talk about isolation as a writer and writer's block.
Yes. So it's interesting. I just started like a local entrepreneur group for Christian women, because being an entrepreneur is a very solo project, especially when you're just starting out. You don't have a team yet. There's no one else that I know who is not only being an author, but a hybrid author with traditional publishing and self-publishing, doing all their own marketing and feeling led to launch a business on top of that.
Yeah.
And so there's not anybody I can sit down and talk to all of those things about over coffee, which is my favorite mode of connecting. And so really, especially in the beginning, joining ACFW and having those critique groups, now there's so many, like I'm just starting to join more. I'm kind of getting back in that mode of realizing I need that fellowship
Yeah.
of Christian authors and writers. So just, I think a week or two ago, I joined 10 Christian author groups on Facebook.
Awesome.
And just interacting with people virtually is good. I think because we're so isolated, I can't go to a conference every week.
Right.
To have that interaction, but just making priority, because I'm always uplifted when I'm around other writers, especially other Christian writers, because we have the ultimate same goal,
Yeah.
not just to write, but to write for the Lord and his glory. And so any way that I can start to connect with other writers, whether it be virtually, online, making those connections, but in person, I would recommend people just pick one.
Yeah.
And there's some small writers conferences. I'm doing Rappahannock Writers Conference in November. And it's not a Christian writers conference, but I guarantee that the Lord will place some believers there.
100%.
But just talking about writing. I'm doing one in Roanoke in January. I'm looking at next year and filling that up. They're the bigger ones, like Proverbs 31, She Speaks, and the Blue Ridge, which I think just took place a month or two ago. But there's a lot of options all over the country. And there's like one of our local universities does a conference once a year. And I would just recommend people just make that connection, because once you go meet somebody in person, then you can develop that relationship. You can be like, hey, let's do a weekly check-in. Let's via text, via video conference, via phone call, whatever works for you. But to have that accountability partner where you go, how's your writing going? Being able to bounce those ideas. And critique groups are great for that.
Yeah.
And that was strictly email. We just emailed a chapter every week. We had conversations over email. We gave feedback. And one of those people that I met way back when, probably 14 years ago, is now my editor. And so you never know where those relationships are going to lead. And I think you have to pursue it, because a lot of us writers tend to be on the introverted side. I'm perfectly content to be in my office with my computer and my dog and maybe a fun ocean scene on my second screen.
Yeah.
And just work to hold myself up in my office and try not to get distracted. And so we just have to be intentional about forming those relationships with other writers and other writing communities. And you can go to one conference and just ask the Lord to put that person in your life that help be your encourager, because sometimes just talking to somebody about my story, and sometimes it's another writer, sometimes it's just my gym buddy. And just talking it out loud is like, oh, okay, I got it.
Yeah. Or
I
like
now know
it
what
gives you
needs to
extra
happen
fuel.
next.
Yeah, it gives you extra fuel every time, because they're like,
Absolutely.
even hearing other people's perspectives, because it's not meant that that person is going to think just like you. They're not. That's not going to be true. And so having them push back on something, you're either going to then stand even firmer on said topic and write from that place, or you're gonna be like, you know what? I hear that. That actually makes sense. Let me tweak that, because books do have this sense of finality to them. You did mention that we can do re-edits, we can do second editions, third editions. But when something goes from just like storytelling mouth to mouth, ear to ear, or mouth to ear, right? It's just in person, words will fall away. But when there is something that is cemented in this way, it can feel very vulnerable, right? And this is where I think sometimes that writer's block piece that I was alluding to earlier can come from, because they're like, I can't share that part of the story, or I can't talk about this person in that way. And so you're protecting other people. There's this fear of man. There's this fear of disappointment. There's this fear of being seen or known. And so writing being so vulnerable, being that place in which we can talk to the paper. I love that. Talk about how you've combated that and how you help people push past that from a writer's block perspective.
Well, the one word that comes up in that whole conversation is perfectionism.
Yes.
And I think that's a big hurdle to get over. And I think, like, I wrote very quickly when I was a new writer because I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't know what wasn't good. And so as I've learned what really good writing is, it almost is a hindrance to me just free writing, because I'm like, oh no, I've got to go back and tweak that. And so one thing I really try to preach to myself as well as other people, just get something on paper, because your first draft is never your final draft. Rarely is your second draft your final draft. And so when you have those concerns, because I tell people there's always a little bit of me and a little bit of my life in every book that I write. I won't necessarily tell you which it is, but it's always there. And of course, other people that we know end up in our books, and their personalities and their quirks, and maybe even challenges that we have faced with those people go into our writing. And so it's okay to set all of that aside and just focus on the story, knowing that we can come back and tweak it as needed, we want it to be as perfect as it can be at the end, but that will stop you from ever writing in the beginning, if that is your goal from word one, page one. And so I tell people, just get it down. Absolutely. Just get it down. And if you have to, if you know what your fears are, and this is one thing I've started implementing more, write down the opposite of that fear. So like one of mine, you talked about the fear of man. I seek not the approval of man, but the approval of God. And so making that a part of my mindset and my consciousness, and being intentional about taking those fears and turning them over to the Lord, and sometimes very tangibly writing out through scripture-based truths, I am not fearful. God has given me a spirit of power and love and self-control. And just reminding ourselves of those truths. And perfection, especially on the first draft, is not our goal. Our goal is just to circle back to be obedient to what the Lord's called us to do.
I'm processing how just those affirmations would be such a massive asset to writers. Like, you should have, even if you created like a short Audibles podcast snippets, and it's like, you're facing writer's block. Here's the affirmation. Here's the prayer. You're facing fear of man. Here's the affirmation. Here's the prayer. It'd be a great lead magnet for you. And I need it.
Another idea.
I know, just what you need. need, right? Just what you need, another idea. But really, I'm like, wow, that'd be really profound and such a resource to people, and then still be an engagement piece to what you offer them long term.
Right.
So let's go back to something you've alluded to. It came out in the intro. You've talked about it a couple of times, and it's become something that, when you have the red car and then everybody has a red car, whatever that syndrome is, that you're like,
Right.
everyone around me is a coach, right? You
Yes.
mentioned homeschooling, and you are about to essentially retire from homeschooling,
Yep.
being that your kiddos are going to be out of the nest. This is something that's been really newly exposed, and I see so many of my friends shifting to because of the climate of the culture and lots of other reasons. We could go into a whole nother podcast about that.
Yep.
Talk to me about that process of homeschooling and how writing has helped infuse what it is that your kids learned with you, from you, by you, and through you during this time.
So yeah, so we, I guess, just entered our 17th year of homeschooling.
Wow.
It wasn't anything I ever expected to do. I was the person that said, "Oh, I could never homeschool," and
Wow.
the Lord just has a fabulous sense of humor and brought me
Every
to
time, don't tell them
that.
no.
So first of all, I guess writing, I'm working alongside my kids when they're doing school. My goal is always to make them independent learners, to love learning, and to really move them to do that independently. And so I would say from day one, with a baby on my lap and doing school and just the one hand able to type, but working with them, what I've loved to see, and I was not intentional about this, but my oldest just graduated with her degree in English and she wants to be an editor.
Aww.
All of my girls love reading. My son has some difficulty with reading, but he will still do it. So I'll never forget the day where he voluntarily read to his little sister when he was 7, because before there it was a brick wall. So creating that love of the word, but also just stories and the word, and seeing the imagination, talking about my stories with my kids. And whenever I have a younger character, I'm like, okay, I need to run this by you. What is the lingo? I know I don't know all the right words. I sound like a Gen Xer as a 17-year-old in my book. So help me with that.
So cool.
And just getting to experience as I'm working with them with school, they're seeing me be creative and the freedom that comes along with that, that we're not stuck in any outside expectations of what either school looks like or writing looks like, and having that freedom to follow whatever the Lord calls you to do in the daily grind, but also the big picture, which I think both writing and homeschooling both fit that very well.
Beautiful. Yeah, so beautifully. My son is like begging me to homeschool, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Lord, really? This is where we're going? But they're at a very small, intimate, amazing Christian school. There's like 17 kids in the whole school, right?
Oh, wow.
So it is, I feel like the best next version. If I'm not going to actually bring him home, I feel like he's being homeschooled. But you never know what the future holds. He'll be in 6th grade next year. And so that's a pivotal, like, shift year as well. But
the Lord's good at surprising us.
Yes, he absolutely is. He is so much. And I think that's another portion with our stories and our writing is I'll go to write with an intention. And then I see, it's almost like when we're speaking and we're able to be prophetic and lean into our skills and our gifts that God has given us, you'll see him start to come through your words. And you're like, wow, I've never said that before out loud. I never thought to even go that direction with the story. And so for those of you who are also just like eager to spend time with the Holy Spirit and to allow him to move through you, and maybe voice isn't the way in which you want to do it, but voice will always be utilized, is voice through your words, through your characters, through the way in which you write. And so you're sharing that even as you're saying all these different stories that come to life. God is an ultimate storyteller. Like, look at what Jesus, how he spoke in parables. Those are stories.
Yeah.
So good. So Tracy, we're going to wrap up our show here. It's been amazing talking with you. I know that there are so many people who need the Christian Writing Academy. So I'm going to be pointing people your direction. And I would love if they need an editor. You're also an editor. And lastly, as you said, you also are the encourager. And so if you're looking for someone to do that with you, Tracy Wainwright is your girl. Tracy, are there any other specific ways or things that you want to gift to the audience or share about before we say hi, say bye?
So feel free to visit either tracywainwright.com or thechristianwritingcoach.net. I always have freebies available because everybody needs something to help catalyst them into that next stage. So whether it's a free book or a free guide, a free course, check it out. Let me know what your writing needs are. Tracy at thewritingcoach.net. I would love to help you get to the next point in your writing journey.
Awesome. Tracy, you've been such a gift to have here, and I can't wait to get my hands on more of your books. You guys make sure you also tune in and go to her Instagram. You know, most of us hang out over there. Tracy Writes for Him, where you'll get even more encouragement and reminders that we can do the good work, even through our hands, our words, and keyboards. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Tracy. Y'all be blessed.
Thanks, Tamara. You too.
Sure thing.